Hey there, it's Joey. Welcome back to the channel. Let's get EDH wrecked. Today, I'd like to share with you a bit of an oops. I attempted recently to make one of my decks just a little bit worse, to scale it back a smidge, and instead, I accidentally made it better. How did this happen? What's going on? Let's break it down, starting with some context. So my New Year's resolution with Magic this year has been to eliminate shuffling from my decks. I mentioned this in a prior episode at the end of last year, but the main thing is that I just got really tired of shuffling up, we all get ready to play, and then my first move is like fetch land, search for a triome, and shuffle again. And then next turn play a land and cast a Nature's Lore and find a dual land and shuffle again, etc. Especially after having played some Riftbound last year, a game that has no shuffling at all in it, I was just like, I need more of that. It's a very small change that, at least for the way that my brain works, made a big difference in my joy and excitement for playing Magic. After all, I've had decks that I took apart because they were a little bit too cumbersome in the past. And yes, gotta admit, this was also partly influenced by the 200 card deck episode of Extra Turns that I got to feature on with my colleague Dana. In that episode, we all brewed 200 card decks, and we were not allowed to play anything that caused searching because, shuffling 200 cards is kind of a lot. Fun fact, I liked it so much that I've actually kept my Babala Saga deck as a 200 card deck, and this is the deck box. And I have been updating it ever since then. Links to all of our decks are in the description if you want to check that out for any reason. And feel free to hit the YouTube buttons while you're there if you like what you see. Could be fun. Anyway, point is, all of these small influences were building up and made me feel like I really just wanted to make a proper effort this year to go through my decks and remove from them any cards that caused me to search or shuffle. So I did. This means I'm not playing cards like Invasion of Ikoria or the new Earthbender Ascension in my Baba list, even though they're so good in that deck. I removed things like Fetch Lands and Sakura Tribe Elder from my Winter deck. I removed cards like Escape Tunnel from my Barakos list. I even removed Angel of the Ruins from my Celis Domino Reanimator deck because that card has plane cycling. For the most part, this was a small change across most of my decks, only like 1, 2, or 3 cards at most in each of them, since I'm already not playing a lot of tutors in my commander decks. But I have some decks for whom removing search effects was a big change, and one of those decks, the one that I want to talk about in this video, is one of my newer decks, Avatar Kyoshi, a mono-green, earthbending, +1 counters lands matter deck. And real quick, as long as I'm doing show and tell with funny deck boxes here, this is my deck box for my Kyoshi deck. It's got a little top on top, it's magnet, it's got that place where you can feature your commander in the front of the deck box, right? But I opened up this screenshot card and I realized a Fire Lord Modok was a much more funny situation, so yeah. Anyway, let's get to the deck list. She killed Chin the Conqueror. It's Avatar Kyoshi, an 8-mana mono-green hexproof on her turn legend who stomps on the ground to untap an earthbend a land on combat. I'd been tinkering between using her or Toph Earthbending Master, but Kyoshi eventually won me over. You could say that she's the one I landed on. So this is the list before I tinkered with it and removed all shuffle effects. A link to this version of the deck will of course be in the description box below. Longtime viewers may recognize that this deck actually contains many pieces of my old Titania list, which is a deck that I officially retired last year. Titania was my undefeated bracket 4 list that I simply never felt that I had cause to play often enough, and when the earthbending mechanic came out, I seized on that opportunity to make a new mono-green lands matter deck that I just would be able to play a little bit more regularly in most of my pods that function around the bracket 3 area. And as you may notice from me scrolling through this deck here, this version of the deck contained a butt ton of searching and shuffling effects. Ramp spells, fetch lands, Kodama of the West tree. Choosing not to use effects that cause searching or shuffling is a big shift for this deck. Like, it's a fourth of the cards in the deck. And in fact, just looking at the spells, it's nearly a third of the 60-ish non-land cards in the deck. Removing all of those effects wouldn't just be a small deal like all of my other decks, this would be a big change. But I am committed, not just to my man, and not just to the belief that the 1997 screwball comedy film Robin and Michelle's High School Reunion, directed by David Merkin and written by Robin Schiff, is an underrated masterpiece, but also to my mission this year. Even though losing all of those effects would mean losing out on powerful cards and powerful synergies, I'm dedicated, so I took them out. That meant not being able to crop rotation into a Talon Gates of Madara, a trick that won me 2 games last year. It meant not getting as many landfall triggers on cards like Tireless Provisioner anymore. It meant losing out on the ability to scapeshift into a Field of the Dead and make a bunch of zombies all at once. In fact, it also meant going from 3 game changers in the deck to just 1 game changer now. It meant not being able to loop fetch lands out of the graveyard with a card like Icetail Explorer, and even not getting the trample benefit from Kodama of the West tree anymore because a different part of that card had searching and shuffling on it. So this right here was the Kyoshi deck before, and this is her after. A mono green deck that cares about +1 counters and lands, that isn't running land fetching ramp anymore. Many of the cards remain the same, but now my ramp takes the form of mana dorks, artifacts, and enchantments. Goodbye Cultivate and Kodama's Reach, hello Worn Power Stone and Overgrowth. More important than just changing the mana accelerants, though, is that this also forced a change to the landfall payoffs in the deck. Where previously I was scape-shifting into a bunch of lands to get tons of Toff and Tireless Provision or landfall triggers, or triggering a Scoot Swarm 3 times in a turn by looping lands out of my yard and casting a ramp spell alongside it, now those things were just not really an option. By and large, I felt that this change necessitated the removal of a bunch of my favorite cards from the deck. Like, I was so lucky to even open up that Toff in a pack, and now I was yanking her out of the deck. But, she just doesn't make as much sense here in a deck that doesn't have any searching and shuffling. So here I was swapping out not just the ramp and a couple of fetch lands, but several powerhouse cards too. Maybe not everyone will say that this change constitutes a huge downgrade, and yeah, it's not like I went super extreme and turned the deck into 99 forests. I didn't hamstring myself by replacing everything with trash cards or increasing the mana curve by replacing all 2-drops with 3-drops or things like that. But I did move away from a style of ramp that had lots of cross synergies and moved towards ramp that is more vulnerable to various forms of removal. Especially since there are a lot of folks who believe that mono-green land searching ramp is super overpowered. Well, here all of y'all are. I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and I'm taking the land ramp out of my deck, and instead I'm using mana rocks, mana dorks, and enchantments. I'm proactively making myself more susceptible to board wipes and enchantment and artifact destruction that could disrupt my mana resources. And beyond just new vulnerabilities, this change also introduced some possible flub opportunities. Enchantment ramp like Overgrowth attaching to a land means that I really don't want to earthbend that land, Or more artifacts in the deck means more colorless mana production, which could sometimes make me stumble on not having enough green mana to play out multiple spells if they have lots of green pips. These are not utter travesties, but I do think that they represent the loss of a couple of percentage points here and there, It just makes for a slightly increased risk of encountering more non-bows. So I made this change a little while ago, and I wanted to see if that majorly impacted how the deck plays. It's still bracket 3, I'm not downplaying it in pregame discussions, and I'm still basically playing it in the same spaces against opponents who know how the deck works already and know its weaknesses, so yeah, let's see how it— Oh, come on, you've seen the title of the video, you already know what's happening. The deck got better. It's been winning more games. I keep a log of my games for the data episodes that we do at the end of each year on this channel, and I noted in a previous one of those episodes that my initial games with Kyoshi, her maiden voyages, were really strong. She got a bunch of wins up front, but as my playgroups got a bit more familiar with her and started to see her weak spots, the wins really swiftly started to trend back down. And then at the beginning of this year, after making those changes, my wins are right back up again. Is it a perfect record? No, there are still some losses in there, but it's fewer losses than before. It's a win percentage that is making me a little bit uncomfortable. Like, what is happening here? And even in the games that I lost, I should note that I lost those games by like an inch, not by a mile. I was still really in it and nearly got there, rather than being completely powerless or helpless during those games. So what the heck is happening here? Why did me changing this many cards in the deck in a way that I thought would be a small scale backwards actually lead to me winning a little bit more? What's going on here? Let's figure out what happened. Here is a quick play-by-play of how I discovered this phenomenon. One of the first things I noticed is that, not shuffling so much anymore kind of feels nice. My experiment this year seems to be working. I'm still drawing plenty of cards that are giving me good mana and resources, and I just hope that they don't get blown up. One of the bigger stands out in my very first game of the year. Boy, does a Somberwald Sage feel so good. That card really helped me get my 8 mana commander out a lot faster. What a rush. I wasn't initially playing that one because I was trying to keep my mana acceleration in the realm of caring about lands for the landfall payoffs in that deck, but I initially chalked that card and its overperformance as just I must have miscalculated in my original version of the deck. I just should have been playing this card all along. Even though it doesn't have anything to do with lands, and even though it's a creature that could get, swept up by odd removal here and there, it still just is maybe a card that I should have been using to begin with, right? But then, speaking of big mana boosts from creatures, the very next thing that I noticed was that, dang, Karametra's Acolyte sure is tapping for a whole lot more mana than I'm used to. This was a carryover from the first version of the list. It's in both versions of the deck, but it wasn't performing as well in that original iteration. So why is it feeling like such an MVP now? Well, because in the first version of the deck, I had basically 0 cards that have green pips that stick around in play. My ramp spells would find a land and then the spell would move on to the graveyard. Whereas now I'm playing stuff that actually sticks around in the battlefield and that happened to tick up the Acolyte's devotion to green and therefore its potency in a minor but meaningful way. Shortly after that, I noticed another fun side effect. I was playing cards like Genesis Wave and Majestic Genesis as really fun big mana payoffs in the original version of the deck, but they weren't always fantastic. They were fun, they'd get some lands, maybe find a nice hit or two off of the top of the deck. Majestic Genesis is also really fun when you have a commander that has such a high mana cost, but they weren't complete blowout cards. I just really liked them as nice ways to get a new board if I needed to, and if I had a whole bunch of mana lying around. In the prior version of the deck, these cards were like kind of just okay, whereas now they were all stars, because nearly everything is a hit. I have fewer spells and more actual permanents that will stick in play. So now when I'm casting them, I almost always end up mana positive because I'll hit like a Pathbreaker Ibex and a bunch of lands and a Thrain Dynamo and a Herd Heirloom or whatever. Speaking of lands, let's talk about those. The next thing that I noticed is that by removing the fetch lands that I'd been previously playing, I had opened up a little bit more room for some utility lands. All right, cool. That's a nice feeling. But it wasn't just that. I also noticed that hey, I no longer have that nagging worry in the back of my mind about whether or not I'm going to run out of basic lands left in my deck every time that I want to find a land in the deck to trigger a landfall payoff, because now the deck doesn't care about that as much anymore. A nice easing off of some secret pressure that I didn't even realize was weighing on my mind. Interesting side effect. But not only that, I also realized I was finally getting a chance to try out a couple of cards that I'd originally felt like I just couldn't justify the first time around. Like little old Bugenhagen, the winner of the most fun name to say award, Bugenhagen, whose incidental reach saved my life the other day. Kudos, man. Or my favorite example of this is actually Visions of Beyond, a card that doubles counters on a creature and which flashes back with a cost that gets reduced by however expensive your commander is, and in this case, that means chopping 8 mana off of the flashback cost. That's really cool. It's a sorcerer speed card. There are limitations on it, but now that I wasn't as all in on lands matter cards, I had room to finally try it. And you know what? It's been fun, and in some cases, pretty powerful. And as all of these little observations added up, the puzzle pieces began to finally form the shape of a pretty interesting discovery. I had taken out what I considered to be very powerful synergies in a deck that ostensibly cared not just about counters, but also about lands. I removed land searching and landfall payoffs, which have their own interconnected synergies within that group of 30-ish cards. And what I replaced it with was a much simpler ramp and acceleration package, plus a few cards that I'd been keen to try out. And as it turns out, those new cards didn't have a lot of interconnected synergies the way that the previous 30-ish cards do, but they did happen to have synergy with some of the other cards in the deck. Synergies that I simply hadn't noticed before, and that I was finally giving a chance to. And the cards that I was finally giving a chance to impress me turned out to do so. I found them to be pretty impressive indeed. And this had the incidental benefit of streamlining things just a hair. Like now the deck is basically all in on the counter synergy, and it no longer really has the backup plan that some of those landfall cards constituted. I still personally consider this to be a downgrade. I liked knowing that my commander was not a linchpin, that if something went wrong and it got permanently removed, I still had the option to assemble a swarm of scoots, for instance. Like, I think those landfall cards were fitting nicely into both Plan A and Plan B, but I can't deny that having now abandoned a Plan B at all does come with the benefit of a little bit of extra focus. And perhaps most importantly, a lot of these cards in the new version of the deck function a bit more like a glass cannon. A Thrain Dynamo is more susceptible to a Reclamation Sage trigger. It's true. A Somberwald Sage could be hit by Auntie Ool's -1 counters. Absolutely. And of course, we can't forget that me running more Artifact and Enchantment ramp means that I am cut off from certain cards in mono green. Like, I'm not going to play a Bane of Progress in my own deck, lest I ruin my own advantages, right? But while they are more vulnerable to a Rec Sage or a minus counter or whatever, if other players don't deal with them, they are also a huge mana boost. Greater risk, but greater reward. So yeah, my attempt at tuning this deck down meant increasing a degree of risk, playing cards that just are a smidge more precarious, which basically means that what I actually did was make a glass cannon more glass and more cannon-y. Taking cards out of this one area meant increasing potency in another area. And you know what? Maybe it's the case that I just haven't been punished for these changes in a game yet. Maybe I just haven't yet encountered the austere command or mass removal that is going to set my entire deck back to the Stone Age during a game. But at the same time, I don't know, a Vandal Blast isn't going to tag all of my new ramp options, right? Or a Board Wipe isn't going to hit my enchantments, just my creatures, or my Mana Dorks are not always going to be hit by the same types of removal as my enchantments or my Mana Rocks are. Turns out there's security and strength in diversity. What a concept. So what's our final actual lesson here? What do we learn from experiences like this? Well, the ultimate point that this video has been barreling towards is actually rather simple. Your progress isn't linear. This was my experience where I tried to crank a deck down a little bit, and I wound up not accomplishing that goal. By some metrics, I actually made it an improvement, and maybe some folks out there will call it neither an up nor a downgrade, but actually a lateral move. And that example sits right next to the times when attempts to make a deck better accidentally end up making a deck worse. Yes, this is a sister video to this one I did a short time ago about times when adding cards that look great might actually come back around to bite you in the butt. In this video, I documented the opposite journey, but those circumstances are still connected by the same underlying base. Commander is such an interconnected and dynamic space that lines are not always clean and easy absolutes, but rather end up being messy and fuzzy. This game has so many complexities that you may not catch until you run headlong into them. Getting better at something is not a linear line going up, and scaling back is not a simple line going down. Since this deck is based on a legend from the Avatar set, allow me to be really cheesy for just a brief moment and make reference to the show After the Last Airbender, and specifically Zuko's arc, which no video on the internet has ever done before. I am very original, thank you very much. Look, everyone's heard that Zuko's redemption arc is like really great, right? Without getting into major detail, I'll simply say that one of the best aspects of that arc is that many of Zuko's attempts at a mea culpa are astonishing backfires. Progress is jagged and messy, and the thing that matters is just continuing to try amidst multiple failures. And you know what? All those Hollywood folks out there wondering why people like Zuko's arc, but they don't like villain redemptions and recent blockbusters, it's because Zuko doesn't just do one good thing and then the narrative expects you to believe that that forgives all past wrongdoing. Like Hollywood, you took the wrong lesson, diva. Okay, I'll talk about magic rectangles again. Look, the point is there's a dang good bunch of life lessons attached to this silly little card game, and this is one of them. That progress might trend upwards, but it's gonna look a little bit like this for a while, right? And that's a good thing both to be aware of to get better and more comfortable with the game, but also to help you figure out things IRL too. I could easily have undergone the opposite journey of this video. Like what if I had started off with a bunch of artifact and enchantment and mana dork type of effects, and then moved towards more of the landfall cards, only to discover that suddenly my Genesis Wave wasn't as good anymore, or my Karametra's Acolyte was producing less mana now. If that had happened, it just would be helpful to understand that this doesn't mean I'm a garbage deck builder or whatever. It just means that it's always the case that some upgrades will come with different strings attached to them, and that there will always be ripple effects that you don't anticipate, and that with time, you'll figure it out. And this means that your attempts at downgrades will not be linear either. Sometimes we attempt to tone things down, say when you're teaching a new player a board game or something, but it turns out you didn't adjust quite as well as you thought, and you still went a little too hard in the paint. That's going to happen too. Doesn't mean that you suck at evaluating power level or that you don't understand the game as well as you thought you did or anything like that. It just means that you got to learn something at a time that you maybe weren't expecting to learn something. And it means that you keep on keeping on. What a treasure trove of experiences to explore, right? Enjoy your games, enjoy the deck list in the description below, and hit the YouTube buttons if you liked what you saw and you want more. And you know what? Let me know your favorite mana ramp cards that don't involve searching and shuffling. I'll see you in the comments, but until next time, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.